Professor Shashana's wonderful presentation, the depth of material in such an accessible language. Thank you very much. I can't help but tell a short story leading from her presentation. I've been introduced to you as an engineer. So from a technology point of view, I acknowledge the continuity and change in technologies of building and all that. And I am particularly fortunate to have participated in building, according to the Owe tradition, a few houses in my parents' neighborhood in our village in Igokoto in Yewa area of Ogun State. And very interesting technology. They gather mud, put water, and they use their feet to make a consistent paste of earth, which is then thrown up to the person who is building. And as the building is going up, you need stronger and stronger person to throw up the material. And it really intrigued me as a child, the accuracy of the throwing and the dexterity of the catching, and the way something you saw yesterday at this level goes up and goes up until it is roofed. Very, very interesting sight. Tomorrow, the Cocoa House in downtown Ibadan is going to be celebrated after 60 years of its building. And it reminded me the story of an Ijesha man who came from Ilesha and got to Ibadan and looked up at Cocoa House and said, "Oh, whoever threw the mud from this level to that height is a great thrower." And these are some of the realities, the dynamisms in life that we address by this gathering, looking at this culture of resistance, culture of remembrance, culture of collective look back at our culture and how it goes into the future. I've been asked to speak to the issue of alternative heritage and the architecture of resistance with the subtext of preserving the sacred, the cultural, and the uncelebrated. And I chose to add, before the uncelebrated, even the under-celebrated, because there are many things in our environment that are under-celebrated by virtue of the fact that somewhere in our psyche we think that anything that belongs to the past should be past. A clear example is the story Professor Shashana told about Ile Akogun, where people think that whatever is in the past should be in the past. Even further down the road, up the road there, we have the Mako Hall that was, as far as I'm concerned, destroyed when it was roofed with some funny materials and was tiled with probably tiles from Italy, as though we do not have materials that can do justice to the traditional wood pallets that was used to tile the place. And of course, immediately that was done, there were various other effects. The acoustics went ballistic, and various other things happened, which tells us that we should be a lot more deliberate in making changes in our situation. I have this tendency of trying to break things down to the barest minimum. It helps me. That's the way I'm able to think. In fact, some of my friends have described me as a fundamentalist, that I always go to the fundamentals, not in the negative way of fundamentalism. So I like to start by trying to define heritage. Heritage. Heritage, we can say, consists of legacy assets which people pass from one generation before to the present, which we live by and with in the present, and we have a responsibility to pass to the next generation. That is what we refer to when we talk of legacy. Legacy, heritage. Heritage could be natural, which is formed mainly by the natural principles in nature without any deliberate human intervention. There could be adjustments of nature to human activities, but when we talk of natural heritage, we are talking of evolution of materials, of non-material reality in an environment which are results of natural principles without much of human deliberate intervention. Then we also have the artificial, the technology induced, which results from human deliberate intervention, because humans, all living beings, have a way of adapting themselves to their environment. Not only adapt themselves to their environment, they also try to adapt their environment for their comfort and for their betterment. And that's why we say that technology answers questions raised by culture and address problems formulated by culture. That's the kind of interaction between human beings and their environment. So we have here natural heritage and artificial heritage. Put in a more gentle way of speaking, heritage that consists of artifacts. Things that when you see, you say for sure a human being has passed this place. And these elements of heritage, both natural and artificial, determine communal memory and defines a people's identity. It could be physical objects, it could be cultural practices, it could be developed knowledge, it could be acquired values, as long as they are bequeathed from a coming to a new generation, it is heritage. It could be, example, oral tradition, stories that have been devised by observing the environment, indigenous knowledge of traditional medicine, spiritual beliefs, scientific knowledge embedded in, for example, the Yoruba concept of Asha versus Ewo. The ones that we have deliberately put together, àwọn tí Asha, as against àwọn tí Ewo, in principles dictated by principles of cause and effects and our observation of the environment. They could be tangible in the sense of natural landscapes, part of which Professor Shashon has talked about, ecosystem, biodiversity. All these stamp the culture and give meaning to the existence of a people in the form of, say, sacred forests, heritage coastlines, and such. These elements of heritage feature intergenerational transmission, which is part of what makes them vitally heritage, which helps to connect the past with the present and the present to the future. They institute identity and belonging for a people. They work as markers of who a people are, where they come from, and where they are likely to proceed to. They embed cultural values, not just material worth, but cultural values that define and identify the community. And of very, very great importance to our engagement today is the feature of vulnerability. These elements of heritage can be vulnerable for various reasons, probably due to neglect, probably due to modernization, cultural suppression, environmental damage, and all these should be studiously engaged in such a way that the present, who had the good fortune of getting this heritage from the previous generation, discharge their responsibility of passing it to the next generation. To this extent, we can identify what we refer to as alternative. 10 minutes to go, I've had it. He's trying to make up. Alternative heritage, which we can regard as heritage outside mainstream heritage. The elements of our lives that we clearly and consciously regard as our, for example, our language. We carefully and consciously see our language as something that links our past to our present and our present to our future. But even then, it is vulnerable. But even beyond that, there are other elements of our heritage that go outside the mainstream heritage. These are the marginalized elements of heritage, the intangible, and sometimes the contested narratives, contested historical narratives, which out of sometimes ignorance, out of sometimes contention with other peoples, sometimes deliberate manipulation of a people's collective memory, for example, in colonization. So all these are elements of some of the elements of vulnerability of alternative heritage. Now, alternative heritage can, as Professor Shashino has so eloquently presented, preserve through architecture, through rituals, through place-based memory. Somebody spoke earlier on of the Bauer style. That's a place-based memory. All sorts of memory come with a Bauer style. If you know your history and you know the role that I think is Captain of Major Bauer played in Yoruba history, it was that arrested Ogedengbe Agbogungboro at Itopoloji Ogun. And many others. I mean, go to Oyo and you hear tales of woe, of what Captain Bauer did. So when we celebrate Bauer's Tower, we should go beyond the surface and understand the effect of the personality and the personhood of Captain Bauer on Yoruba history. Also, we talk about sacred, talk about alternative heritage being particularly vulnerable, and that's important to what we want to speak to today. Now, my title specifically talks about architecture of resistance. I am not an architect. Members of their movement with that process, and they now become the guardians of health in the society. They go around from place to place and take away things that have come into, that infected people have come into contact with. And that was how they were able to keep the society safe. Now, that process of Sibere towards the end is a religious ritual. to their woe is scientific routine.